Welcome to the Road to the Draft, presented by P&G and Meyer. Nathan Zegura alongside Brown senior staff writer Andrew Gribble, and we're going to produce a series of videos for you looking at some of the critical positions that we think the Browns are going to have their eyes on in this year's draft. And we're going to start with a position that many people think, Gribbs, is the biggest need for the Browns still headed into the draft, the cornerback position.
Yeah, it's one that there's been a lot of turnover over the last year, and it comes after a season in which you could never seemingly get all these guys healthy at the same time. So the Browns did see the need for depth at a very valuable position, but you bring in a guy like Troy Hill, but you also have some subtraction with losing Terrence Mitchell and Kevin Johnson and Tavierre Thomas in free agency. So it's a kind of a combination of biggest potential need and also a position of strength when you look at this first round class.
So if you're looking at the Browns cornerback room right now, Denzel Ward, the Pro Bowler, he's a starter on one side. Greedy Williams, your second-round pick, who missed all of last season with that nerve issue in his shoulder, is expected to be back. And you mentioned Troy Hill, who came from the Rams' #1 ranked pass defenses into play the slot. And Hill had 3 defensive touchdowns last year, including 2 pick sixes for the Rams. So those would be your starters as of today. Your top backups, MJ Stewart, who played a nice role for you, especially down the stretch. He's got inside-outside versatility, had the interceptions against Pittsburgh in Week 17 and in that wild card game as well. You've got Robert Jackson back, who started for you in that wild card game that you beat the Steelers. Brian Allen, who's played 17 games in the league, is back. And then there's A.J. Green, who was kind of the prized undrafted free agent last year. And, Jeff Howard, the team's defensive back coach, has said, we're excited to see what he can do, what steps forward he can take. But when you think about the fact that Denzel has missed time every season he's been in the NFL, Greedy is coming back after, missing an entire season, and even in his rookie year didn't play the full complement, you can see why I think adding a premium player in that position is going to be important.
Well, think back to the 2019 season, which I granted you don't want to remember too much from that season, but remember when Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams hurt their hamstrings at the same practice and missed 4 games. And honestly, the Browns held their own because they had 2 proven veterans behind them in TJ Carey and Terrence Mitchell. That was on display of what is the value of good cornerback depth. So now you're going into a draft where you already acknowledge the depth probably isn't at the level you want it to be. And I go into this thinking not only could the Browns draft a corner with their first pick, but I could see multiple of these early picks of the 9 that you have being used to address this cornerback position, because free agency, you got better in the slot by getting Troy Hill, but I think the price tag was a little bit too rich for some of these outside corners in free agency. So you really only added 1. You could probably add a few more to inject more talent and, more importantly, some more depth in that group.
Yeah, you're right. Other than MJ Stewart, who's a guy who has started games in the NFL, you don't really have that backup that you had a few years ago in a TJ Carey, or certainly not in a Money Mitch, or even a guy like Kevin Johnson, who's a former first round that started his whole career. So, the majority of your snaps from that position from a year ago, other than Denzel Ward, are not on this roster. So I think you're right. There could be a veteran addition still to come, perhaps cheaper down the road. But I do think this draft and where the Browns pick at 26 lines up very, very well for them. And so we'll get into some of these top prospects now. Patrick Surtain's not going to be on our list. There isn't a single mock I've seen where he's even made it to pick 16. So we're not going to address him here. Some of the guys on this list might not be there at 26. Maybe they will be there at 26, but let's take a look at some of these top young corners who could be available to the Browns at 26. And, there's a little bit of debate. I'll give you 2 names here, Jaycee Horn, Caleb Farley. Which one is the top? Farley's the top corner on a lot of different draft boards, certainly from the expert standpoint. And Horn is a guy that's at the top of a lot of draft boards as well, along with Surtain. But it just seems like Surtain in these mocks goes earlier. But let's start with Jaycee Horn. What do you like about the kid from South Carolina?
Well, first off, this is a theme at this cornerback position, but first off, the pedigree. I mean, all these guys have seemingly these NFL connections. Jaycee Horn, the son of Joe Horn, who was one of the most memorable players of my childhood, playing it with the Saints and just the theatrics he had. But I mean, this is an elite corner from the conference that seems to produce boatloads of elite cornerbacks in the SEC. And, in talking with Bruce Feldman in a recent episode of the Best Podcast Available, Jaycee Horn is the cornerback that he heard that teams had to game plan the most for over a Patrick Surtain. So this is an elite, big physical corner that can really be your traditional lockdown cornerback. And I think he opted out midway through the season after Will Muschamp got fired at South Carolina and has really been prepping for the draft. And I get it that a lot of these guys had great pro days, but Jaycee Horn really seemed to stand out at his pro day. And I get excited watching this player, but at the same time, I think a lot of other people are excited too, and makes me worry about waiting all the way to 26 to get a player of this caliber.
Yeah, I have a feeling if the Browns want Jaycee Horn to be a Cleveland Brown, they might have to move up to get him. You mentioned only 7 games last year, 8 passes defense, 2 interceptions. He's 6'1", 205, ran a 4.4 40, long, athletic. When you read a lot of the write-ups on him, people feel that he is the best true man corner in this draft. And Dane Brugler in his draft guide said he's a strong physical press man corner in the mold of Aqib Talib. And you'll remember, of course, that Aqib Talib flourished in Denver with Joe Woods as his defensive back coach and defensive coordinator. So maybe that is something that seeing an Aqib Talib similarity in Jaycee Horn might make him all the more attractive to the Browns. And then there's Caleb Farley, who is the top corner, as I said, on many boards. I know Pro Football Focus has him as their number 1 overall corner out of Virginia Tech, but there's a little bit of a question after having that microdiscectomy on his back. He can't work out. He opted out of 2020. What do you have in him, and how do you evaluate where he should go in this draft?
Well, he's just an interesting study because he opted out of the season, but even when he did opt out of the 2020 season, there was a prevailing thought that this is one of the top cornerbacks, if not the top corner in this year's class, no matter what he does if he plays. But, as I've discussed before, this is a draft where teams have a lot of unknowns with a lot of players because of just the weirdness of the college football season. Some guys didn't play. Some guys played short schedules. Some guys played against terrible competition all year because they couldn't schedule games right. And I think what happened with Farley is this is a known. He did have a back procedure. He couldn't do his pro day. And that makes you wonder, could he maybe fall to a spot that may not be reflective of his overall talent? And I think that's where the medical checks that are going to be going on in early April in Indy, those are going to be ultimately determining what happens. But I think if you went into this season thinking Caleb Farley would be all the way down at 26, you'd think you'd struck gold. I mean, this is an elite player at a top position, again, at a school that has a track record of producing great cornerbacks. I mean, I think that this is a school that has that pedigree. So it's going to be a position where someone might be able to take a risk. I don't know if you like taking risks in the first round, but late in the first round, if you can get a player that you evaluate as maybe a top 15 player in this draft all the way at 26, it could be a great coup for the Browns.
I agree. Farley in 2019, first team all ACC, 16 passes defense, 4 interceptions. He's got 29 passes defense in his last 28 games. So he's got an unbelievable knack for getting his hands on the football, great ball skills. Everybody says he's got size, speed, the reaction, the ball skills, Pro Bowl upside. So if he were there at 26, knowing that because you do have Greedy coming back and Denzel and Troy Hill, you can be a little bit more patient with him. And I think, boy, that would be a lot of upside for a guy who was a former high school quarterback. So he really understands route concepts and what teams are trying to do in the passing game. Pretty much the third corner on this list that, consensus wise and grouped with Farley and Jaycee Horn. And somebody who seems to be a little bit of a riser right now is Greg Newsome out of Northwestern. He was first team all Big Ten in 2020. He's had double-digit passes defense each of the last 2 years. And this stat blew my mind. He led the FBS with a 15.7 passer rating against last year. He allowed 1 completion of more than 10 yards all season, Gribbs, all season. That's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, and I think with a guy like Newsome, it seems like he, at least from my amateur analysis, is like the highest floor kind of player. It seems like he's someone that you're going to bring in and he can do the job. And I think that he was really a part of that Northwestern team that I think overachieved in a lot of people's eyes. And I think, when you're coming from Northwestern, you're getting a smart player that can handle the nuances of your defense. And again, this is where you're competing. This is where it gets weird for teams evaluating players. You're comparing a guy who performed at an elite level this past season, comparing him to players that did not play this past season, or players like Jaycee Horn that played half a season. I mean, this is where it gets tricky. But again, Newsome is someone that just, again, fits the mold of what you like in a corner. And I think if you get him at 26, you feel good that this guy's going to play for you for a lot of years.
Yeah, and the guys we were talking about earlier, Farley, Horn, great physical man corners. Newsome, they say, is great in both man and zone, which I think speaks to your high floor comment there. They say he has great mirroring skills, great movement skills, 6', 192, ran a 4.38 40, so an excellent athlete to boot. Asante Samuel Jr. Again, you're going back to that pedigree, which is all over this cornerback group. He's the son, obviously, of Asante Samuel. 24 passes defense, 4 interceptions in his last 20 games. He opted out after 8 games in 2020, kind of the theme in this position as well, but he had 9 passes defense and 3 picks in those. A little smaller, maybe more of a nickel corner than an outside corner, 5'10", 180. But Dane Brugler said he reminds him a little bit of Jair Alexander in his ability to just mirror and stick to receivers on their routes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because with a name like Asante Samuel and playing at a place like Florida State, you thought you may be hearing about this guy a lot more, but I think Florida State's defense and just team in general has not been very good these last couple of years. So I think it's a little bit harder to stand out. But yeah, I mean, I think you look at the skill set, you look at the size. I mean, this is where he differs from the other guys that we just talked about. I think it'll be that, especially with the signing of Troy Hill, you have MJ Stewart on the roster. I know these shouldn't be decisions you weigh when you make the pick, but that makes you wonder if the Browns are leaning more towards that traditional outside guy as opposed to an Asante Samuel. But again, this is the future of the league. I mean, a nickel is a starter on your defense. And I think that now a player like this, maybe a few years ago, Asante Samuel wouldn't be considered a first-round pick. But now I think he's someone that has been more directed toward the region of where the Browns are picking at 26 as compared to some of these other guys who might fit in the reach category.
So those kind of, at least in my research, and you might say different from yours, but they seem like those were the top 4 available. And then there was another group. A lot of these guys end up getting mocked to the Browns actually in the second round of some of these drafts, but Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes from Georgia, Kelvin Joseph, who put on a show, ran a 4.29 at his pro day out of Kentucky, Elijah Molden out of Washington, which has consistently produced excellent corners in the National Football League. And then, oh boy, from Syracuse, Melifonwu, his brother was in the league as well. I'm not going to try on his first name, but he's a 6'3" guy, big, long outside corner. Of that group, anybody stand out to you or any thoughts that you think might be a good fit for the Browns?
Yeah, I just like the pedigree and the background of a guy like a Tyson Campbell. I think that's someone that sticks out to me out of Georgia. I think that he played in an elite program, has kind of the physical skill sets that you love in the corner position. I think needs some just work on technique. And I think he's someone you bring in, you get in your system, you can mold him into take him up to another level. I mean, this is someone that's been a top athlete all the way back to high school. I just, that give me someone like that, and I think you can make the most out of him at the NFL.
Yeah, Campbell, Dane Brugler said, a rare combination of high-end traits, but he lacks polish and consistency. Joe Woods has been a great defensive back coach throughout his career. Jeff Howard is a great defensive back coach. Get them talent and let them polish, let them mold those guys. He's good. Stokes got a comp to William Jackson III, who has been a great corner for the Bengals. So that was a pretty good tandem they had at Georgia. We mentioned Joseph ran a 4.29, first-round talent and athleticism out of Kentucky. There's Elijah Molden. He's kind of an interesting one to me because I've seen his comp be the Honey Badger, but they say he's an excellent nickel, perfect football instincts, loves the game. He's the son of an NFL cornerback himself, Alex Molden. We remember him. So he's a guy, a nickel, but would, I think, give a lot of flexibility in that nickel kind of safety situation and give Joe Woods even more flexibility than he might already have.
Yeah, I can't get over the amount of NFL pedigree in this group. It's like these NFL players knew with their kids, it's like, learn how to backpedal. Like that's the way to get the fastest path to the NFL, because there's a lot of jobs at corner. I think you see a lot of these guys, you look at their background. These are elite athletes at high school. A lot of them usually played quarterback. I mean, Caleb Farley went to Virginia Tech to play wide receiver before he got moved to corner. I mean, these are the kind of the special athletes who are, they're learning the position probably still because they've always been the top guy on their team. So that's what stands out to me with this group more than anything is I like getting these guys in your program because they grew up around it. I think that always helps to have that background.
No doubt. And as you mentioned, this cornerback class is full of it. One quick note on Melifonwu out of Syracuse. He's 6'3", So he reminds people of a Brandon Browner in Seattle. And, those big corners, sometimes it works for them. But if the Browns are looking to play more cover 3 going forward, he's somebody that would be an interesting opposite Denzel Ward because of his unique size and his unique length. But we went through 9 names here. I think the Browns, it's one of the cases where need is going to match up with a real strength in this draft at the cornerback position, Gribbs.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think when you draft someone at the cornerback position late in the first round, are you getting someone that you say this guy's going to be the starter day one, or are you setting up a situation where they're probably going to have to be in a dogfight and compete for a starting job? And I almost like that a little bit because I think you draft in the top half of the first round, that guy better be a starter. This one, I think you're coming into a situation where if these guys become a starter on day one, it's because they earned it at camp.
Absolutely. And that's one of the great things about what Andrew Berry has done with this roster is that you could roll out what you have right now, and we still have the draft to come. So you're looking to add competition and to add some real pieces to the mix. Went through 9 corners right there. So there are a lot of them. We do think it is a big position of need for the Browns as it sits here today. So we'll see what the Browns and Andrew Berry do on draft night as it relates to the cornerback position. Thanks for joining us on the cornerback preview edition of The Road to the Draft.